what most of us must be involved in, whether we teach or write, make films, write films, direct films, play music, act, whatever we do has to not only make people feel good and inspired and at one with other people around them, but also has to educate a new generation to do this very modest thing: change the world. And that was said by Howard Zinn. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Mankind currently finds itself in one of its most precarious positions in history. We truly are in a dilemma as a species. And the most serious part about the situation that we find ourselves in is that we are the ones who have brought about this situation. Indeed, the current dilemma of mankind and the state of the earth we live upon is a direct result of the actions of mankind, or should I say, in many cases, the inaction of mankind. Because unfortunately, while a small percentage of mankind is very, very actively working to control the rest of the people, the vast majority of mankind is allowing this control to be perpetuated solely due to their own inaction. And very often this is because many people do not perceive that a real problem exists. But a problem does exist, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, we know this, don't we? We know that there is environmental degradation occurring. We know that the wars and starvation and all the problems that we face are there. But our biggest dilemma in looking at these problems is that we view each of them separately. We view each of them as being an unrelated issue, when really all of these issues are in fact symptoms of a larger problem. And the larger problem exists again due to the inaction of the vast majority of mankind. A loss of power and a loss of perception of what the actual problem is. Many people view these individual symptoms as being very serious problems on their own, and many of them actually are, but they're not looking beyond the symptoms to see what has caused all of these symptoms to appear, because that is the larger problem. When looking at things such as the financial distress that people are finding themselves in our various countries, when looking at things such as the environmental degradation, coal seam gas mining, the homelessness, the starvation, the corporate rape of our planet, which we are seeing rampant right across the globe at the moment. We are seeing huge mining magnates virtually destroying our countries under our feet. And all the people feel as if they are powerless to do anything about this because they are viewing each one of these symptoms as being a problem unique to itself, when really they are all due to the larger problem which has allowed all of these symptoms to become manifest. And again, people cannot be wholly blamed for the inactive state they find themselves in, because this is the way people are trained to be. This is the way our societies function. And everybody knows that the world needs to change, but they just don't know how to go about it. They think that there's nothing that they can do. But the reality is that this is simply not true, folks. There is a lot that people can do, but in order to bring about any effective change at all, they first need to change their perspective of what the world is, change their perspective of what they are, what their relationship to the world and to the people around them is, and change the way they interact with reality. And I know that probably sounds very esoteric to a lot of people, but I truly do believe that the way to change the world is simply to change your perspective of what the world is, of what you are, and of what this control system actually is. Because once you change your perspective of what the world is, then you change the way you interact with people around you. You change the way you interact with the system, and you change the way you interact with those who you would perceive to be authority figures. But most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, you change the way you interact with those other members of your community who live all around you and with whom you interact every single day. And that is the most important thing. You see, when you change the way you interact with people, it changes your perspective of what the world is. It changes your perception of the world. Because the world is not the way many people perceive it to be. And many people have a very limited view of the world. They have a very limited view of the world because they can very often only really relate to the personal problems that they experience in their own lives. And they view these problems as being local to themselves, when such is not the case. And just as one small example of this, many people, when they view problems in their country, they look at them from a nationalistic perspective. Many people in the UK, for example, when they see a new piece of legislation come in, they think, oh my God, Britain is going down the tube. But really, it's not just Britain. It's every country in the world with a central bank. It happens here in Australia as well. We see a new piece of legislation come in and people think, oh my God, Australia is going down the gurgler. But really what we see is that this same legislation is trialled in different countries all around the world, and they see which one works. And then when they find one that works with those people, then they extrapolate that out and they do it with the other countries around the world. The carbon tax that was brought here in Australia, everyone said that it wouldn't happen anywhere else, but now we see it being gradually brought into other countries. But the point is that we tend to view many of the problems we face as being nationalistic in nature, but they're not. They're not isolated to any particular country. It's a global system that is being created around us, and that's something people need to pay attention to. Because we're not going to address any of these situations if we continue to remain isolated from everybody around us. We're never going to address the situations within our respective countries if we continue to view them as nationalistic problems. These are in fact global problems, folks. We don't need to just change the political systems and the governments and the situation within our respective countries. We need to change the entire world. And so, change the world, folks. There really is a need to do this. And if you are someone out there who may not see this need, then I would suggest that you open your eyes and look around you a little bit. Because the world of today is in a state of utter disrepair. Not only environmentally, but also politically, socially, and most importantly, spiritually. Indeed, every problem that we face as a species can be seen to have spiritual roots. And these spiritual problems that we have exist on so many levels. And one of the reasons mankind remains in this dilemma is because of our unwillingness to face these problems, and very often our unwillingness to even admit these problems may possibly exist. And very often, folks, this is because people find it very difficult to even talk about spirituality. If you mention the word spirituality or start talking about spiritual things to people, they immediately think you're either talking about religion or you're off on some New Age tangent. They don't understand the inner workings of their psyche and how the word can apply to your deepest feelings, your deepest fears, and the deepest parts of yourself. You see, the word spiritual has been co-opted to mean things that it does not necessarily mean. That's something that this system is very good at, ladies and gentlemen, is taking anything that might lead you back to yourself and giving it a false meaning and presenting it there in front of you so that you tend to turn away when someone mentions something about a spiritual problem and you think, oh, this guy's a religious nut or he's a New Age freak. And it's a program, folks. When you think this way about a simple word, it's a programmed response because we all have a spiritual aspect to our lives, and the world could be healed if we were to admit these things about ourselves and to turn and face these things and heal these parts of ourselves that we often refuse to look at. And not only do we refuse to look at them, my friends, but very often, as I said, we won't even admit that these problems exist. But the reality is that this spiritual problem does indeed exist, and it is quite literally the basis of all of the other problems that we face. And though it may sound a little bit strange to people to consider the possibility that all of the physical problems that we face on the planet, the wars, the starvation, the homelessness, Fukushima, the loss of rights, the corrupt financial system, may in fact have their basis in a spiritual problem, which is underlying the whole situation, and may in fact have a spiritual remedy, the reality is that they do. And that's something that's very difficult for people to get their head around. But it's true, they do. This is the basis of all of our problems, my friends. All the environmental degradation, all of the government control, all of these things that are happening on the planet, all of these problems have their basis in the spiritual dilemma that mankind currently finds itself in. And indeed, all of these problems have a spiritual remedy that could be applied, which would heal all of these issues and correct all of the imbalance we see in the world today. And this is something that I'm going to attempt to share with you on this show and over the coming weeks, and just attempt to help people view reality from a slightly different perspective than what they may have previously. Because I believe that once we look at reality from the correct perspective, then it can serve to empower the individual and empower people. And I believe that this is what it will take to create movements within our respective communities that are not really movements at all. They are simply a new way of looking at things, simply an idea whose time has come, a shift in perspective and a change in the paradigm. And I believe that we can do this at a grassroots level throughout our communities, and this is what will ultimately bring about change to the system and change to the corruption that we're currently facing. And we're seeing this corruption all over the world, folks. Our governments are quite literally out of control. They really are. And they are bringing in every type of legislation that they can think of to lock society down. And it's time that society woke up to what's going on and woke up to the power that we actually have. Woke up to what our actual position in the social hierarchy is, and put a stop to this madness before it's too late, before we find ourselves locked down into a completely totalitarian system, because that is the way we are heading. And this is happening in all Western countries without exception, folks. It's not limited to the UK or the United States or Australia or any particular country in Europe. It's happening to every country that has a central bank. Make no mistake about it. You see, central banking and indeed the entire monetary system, the entire corporate controlled monetary system, the entire interest-based monetary system that we currently have is the glue that holds the entire slavery system together. This is why George Bush's axis of evil that he named back in 2003, I think it was every country that did not have a central bank. This is why with the so-called revolution that we saw staged in Libya, the first move of the so-called rebels was to establish a Rothschild-controlled central bank in their country. They did this under the pretext of doing so because it was a sign of freedom for the country, when in fact it was exactly the opposite. And this again, folks, this is subtle mind control. This is taking something and applying a reverse meaning to it. And this is done in order to convey to the people of the West the concept that if you don't have a strong central bank in your country, then your country is not free. When the truth of the matter is that if you do have a strong central bank in your country, then your country consists of a population of manufactured debt slaves. Because that's what central banking is all about. Central banking is indeed the glue that holds the slavery system together, and indeed the entire system of commerce that has been superimposed over the mind of mankind, the way people blindly accept it as a given that they need to pay in order to be alive, is truly one of the biggest problems that we face. And again, folks, this is a spiritual problem. The belief that people hold in the economic system, when the economic system is essentially fiction, my friends. It's simply numbers that exist on a screen. It's simply numbers that exist in a book. It has nothing to do with life. It has nothing to do with abundance. It has nothing to do with creating a viable and vibrant planet. In fact, quite the opposite. It's designed to place people in scarcity in order that the books be balanced. It's designed to train people to perceive economics as being more valuable than life. And again, this is a spiritual problem because we've been led away from ourselves. We've been led away from the natural state of abundance that we should be in. And that state of abundance has been replaced by a perceived state of prosperity. But prosperity can only be achieved through financial gain, whereas abundance is the natural state of this planet and is the natural state of all life forms on this planet. And the thing that prevents us from being in our natural state of abundance is because we are forced to live within a state of contrived and manufactured scarcity, which is a direct result of the system of commerce, which has been superimposed over people's minds. It's very interesting how all people use money every day. We use money to do everything that we do. And we never question why we have to do so. We never question where it came from. We never question who thought this system up. And it's a very, very interesting program because once people are programmed into the monetary system and into using a system of commerce in every aspect of their lives, it becomes very, very difficult for anybody to ever think outside of that program. It's a very, very difficult program to break free of, and it becomes inconceivable to most people to even be able to comprehend how reality could work or how we could have a society at all if we did not have money. And again, folks, this is a program. And if you do some research, what you'll find is that the entire monetary system in its current form is based on Kabbalistic principles. Indeed, the entire concept of needing money or using money at all is based in Kabbalistic principles. It's like an energetic program or a psychic pathogen that has been superimposed over the mind of man. And as I said, once imposed, most people find it extremely difficult to even be able to comprehend of reality without commerce. And yet this is the way we lived for years. This is the way tribal cultures still live. You go to a native culture, a culture that existed as little as 200 years ago, and they found it incomprehensible to think of the concept of having to pay to be alive, of having to pay for anything. Why would we want to extract wealth from other people and place them in a state of scarcity in order to gain something for ourselves? Why would we do this? Indeed, when you look at the whole system of commerce and how it creates a need for us to profit from those around us in order to gain the paper we need to pay to be alive, then it becomes very apparent that the entire system of commerce is a sociopathic system which trains people to behave in a sociopathic manner. If you want to have a successful business, it has to adhere to sociopathic parameters whereby people are placed in scarcity so that others may profit. And so its very basis is in self-gain. And this is simply not the natural way for mankind to think. It's not the natural way that a human mind works. And there may be people out there that will argue with that and say, well, it's about self-gain. It's about getting somewhere in the world. It's about making your own way. It's about making your own profit. It's about running a successful business. But they never really ask what causes the need to do that, because ultimately it is the system of commerce that has been superimposed over mankind and the artificial state of scarcity that they're kept in, which creates the need for someone to even think in that way. Creates the need for you to have to profit from somebody else, and removes from you your natural tendency to give to those around you. And thus it prevents you from being you. It prevents you from experiencing the art of your own life because it places a dollar value on everything you do, on everything you need. It places a dollar value on you even putting a roof over your head or food on the table. And this disconnects you from the abundance which is provided freely for you by this magnificent world that we live on, and thereby disconnects you from the art of your life. because everybody's life is art. Everybody's life is an artistic expression of creation. That's what you're here to do. You're here to experience yourself, to experience the art of yourself, the art of being you. But we get distracted from that. We're told, no, it isn't about being you. It's about being a real estate agent or a teacher or a plumber or a politician or a mechanic or an artist or a road worker or a council member or a police officer. It's about what you do. That's who you are. It's not about who you actually are. And that's the subtle sidestep that this system does with our consciousness. That's the subtle sidestep we take by imposing a system of commerce over our reality. And this whole system, folks, this system that's been superimposed over the minds of man and causes us to be enslaved to things such as money, this is quite literally a matrix, and this is something that I constantly refer to as a paper-based reality. Because it is. It isn't just the fact that we need to collect paper in order to pay to be alive. It's the fact that our entire legal system and our entire governmental system all simply exists on paper. See, people believe the government is real. They view it as some type of entity. It's almost like they expect if they don't pay their taxes that a government building is going to walk down to their suburb and eat their house or something. But the government is a system of fiction, folks. It only exists on paper. The government consists of a whole lot of rules that people wrote in books, and men put on expensive suits and they go to big buildings and they do what it says in the book. And if they want to do something and it isn't in the book, then they write it in the book, and that gives them the ability to do it. And basically, they just do whatever they want. And if people can be appraised by their actions, and it would appear that the main goal of governments around the world, at least any government that has a central bank in their country, is to steal the wealth of the population. And this theft is achieved, and vast sections of the population are discarded by imposing an artificial, fictional reality over their minds. And it is a reality that is 100% not real and is used to enslave the minds of man into a world which is 100% fiction, a paper-based matrix. I mean, we want to do something, we want to build something, we want to go somewhere, we want to create something, we go, oh, is it in the book? Are we allowed to do that? And if we do want to do it, well, the government will look at it anyway and say, well, we can't let you do it yet because we haven't written regulations that control your actions. We need to be able to control everything you create and replace your idea with what we believe reality should be. And this, of course, will be one that serves government and not the people. And we do this across the board, folks. We do it with almost every aspect of our lives. I mean, they even introduce laws which make it illegal to feed homeless people. Now, what is that all about? You think about it, folks. We replace that which is moral with that which is legal. And all that which is legal is that which somebody wrote down on a piece of paper and said, look, it's got a fancy letterhead on it, and so now you all have to do this because it is the law, because I made it up and I called it law. That's all the legal system is. And very often when you see the legal system placing commerce and economics over the value of life, then you begin to see the reality that the legal system has been used to replace that which is morally true with that which is legally true. And this has served, again, to discard large sections of society and to make large sections of the population expendable, because it suits the economic model for this to happen. See, everything about our society is about balancing the books, folks. It's about keeping our economic system in a state of permanent growth, which, of course, is impossible. You can't have permanent growth on a planet with finite resources. It simply doesn't work. And if you attempt to impose such a system, you end up with a planet in the state that ours currently finds itself in. So there's your problem right there. And again, folks, it's all very well for us to look at these situations, to complain about the economic system, to complain about the legal system, to complain about the paper-based reality that we live in, but we have to look a little further and see why this system exists and why it continues to exist. And again, what we find is that it exists because of the spiritual dilemma that we as a species currently find ourselves in. Now, something that is very important for people to see is how the legal system has actually been constructed, how this whole social system has been constructed, and how it has removed us all from the art of our lives, and it has removed our power from us. And this is key, folks. It really is. You see, the legal system was first constructed in order to protect us. I mean, there were people out there in society who were doing bad things, who were stealing from people, who were committing crimes, and so laws were devised in order to protect people from this criminal activity. Of course, one may look at the criminal activity, and really, if you do, you'll find that all crime, apart from crimes of passion, can be traced back to the system of commerce that has been superimposed over the mind of mankind. But that's a tangent that I probably shouldn't go off on for now, but it is something that is important for people to realize, that commerce is the source of crime. Well, it's the source of everyday crime anyway. It's the source of theft, and it's the source of muggings and all of these crimes that people commit because they're in a state of scarcity. This is all because of the economic model that's been superimposed over the mind of man. Though, of course, in the modern world, what we find is that all crime ultimately is the result of legislation. Because when you make more and more things illegal, then obviously more and more crime is committed. Because what you find is that government starts making everyday activities criminal activity, which means that anybody can commit a crime at any time of the day or night simply by being a normal functioning human being. And that's what our legal system is today. But of course, this is not what our legal system was constructed to be at its very inception. In fact, quite to the contrary. Originally, we had a legal system that was constructed to protect us. And then those in power gradually taught us how dangerous the world at large is, and they decided to construct legislation to protect us from virtually everything. And it's got to the point now where we live in what is essentially a nanny state, and we believe that we need all of these laws there to protect us because we believe that the world is far more dangerous than it actually is. And what this has served to do has been to disempower mankind and teach us that we need rulers to look after us. And again, this is a spiritual problem because it's removed our personal power from us, and it's done it to everybody across the board, to the point where people literally believe that they do need government to protect them. And this has created an air of power around government officials, and it's served to create the belief that these people do have power over us, which has in turn caused us to fear the authority that these people claim to have, when really they don't have any authority over us at all. Well, they do if we stand alone against them, but if we have the respect for ourselves and the respect for our community around us to stand together, then they don't. And that's why it's so important for people to learn how to respect themselves and learn how to respect their neighbours, because this is what will solve all the problems we face. And again, this is a spiritual issue. You see, government are simply a group of public trustees whom we appoint. We elect these people, we appoint them to positions of trust, and we expect them to manage our infrastructure for us. But it's gone beyond that now, because they've trained the population in general to believe that we need government to protect us against the big bad world. So now we don't just employ them to manage our infrastructure, we expect them to keep us safe. And again, this has served to disempower the people, because we're not really interested in keeping ourselves safe anymore. We're not really interested in taking responsibility for our lives and for our actions and looking after ourselves. We allow government and police officers to do that for us. And now that they've lulled us into this false sense of security, into the state where we believe we need government to protect us, and they've lulled people into the state where they do not have any personal power anymore, and they believe that government and police are actually authority figures, now they have been shifting the table. Now they've been shifting the goalposts. Now they've been enacting more and more legislation designed to steal more and more of the wealth of the people, to discard more and more of the people, and to lock who is left down into a control grid whereby they reap the wealth of the world for their own, and we are their slaves. And this has taken several generations for them to accomplish, folks. Just observe how the role of the police in our society have changed from the helpful constables you would ask advice from and get directions from, and people who would keep the neighbourhood safe when we were children, to the extremely brutal and sociopathic thugs that they are today. And it becomes pretty obvious to see exactly what's going on here. And when looking at this reality with our police, it's very important to understand that this transition has been achieved through legislation that's been put in place by governments. And again, ladies and gentlemen, these are people that we employ and place in positions of trust to act on our behalf. And I would suggest that every government on the planet, every government that has a central bank in their country and is running a commercial slavery system, is very much in breach of trust. And that's the real problem that we see, folks. And again, this is a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem because of our inability to look at this issue from a responsible perspective. From a perspective where we take responsibility for ourselves, we don't give our power away to anybody else. But again, we don't judge other people or believe we have power over them. Because we don't. We don't have the right to inflict ourselves upon anybody who's done harm to the world. What we have to do is take the responsibility for allowing that harm to be done, because we can stop that anytime we want by claiming our own power. So that's the thing, folks. We don't claim our power by stepping into it. We claim our power by picking up arms and going and overthrowing one tyrant and replacing that tyrant with another tyrant. We've done this throughout history. We've never had a revolution where we were emotionally evolved enough to actually deal with freedom. And that's what I think we have the opportunity of doing at this time in history. I have no desire to hurt the controllers who have done all this damage to the planet. I'm sure there are those who have that desire, and I'm sure there are those who will. Personally, it's not my thing. That's just not what I do. I think these people will expose themselves, they will be ostracized, and they will be their own punishment. But be that as it may, I just think things will sort themselves out. And as I said, I'm sure there are many people who disagree with me on that and who will enact the revenge against these people that these people very much deserve. And so that's not for me to think about. But my point is that we always take that approach. We take the approach of aggression against this system, and we fight and scream and kick and claw our way into the palace to tear the tyrant down. But we just replace that parent with a new parent. And I believe that it is time for a responsible approach to this situation. And I think that that responsible approach is going to be achieved through people changing their perspective of what reality is and how they interact with reality. And I really do believe that it all comes down to respect. Ultimately, that is the key to the prison that we find ourselves in. See, even though we can look at all of these things and we can see all of the crimes that our government carries out against us, when we attempt to deal with it, we simply point the finger at government and we ask government to fix the problem. We don't realize that we are the only ones who can fix the problem, because we actually employ government as public trustees. But we just don't look at things that way. And if we do go up against the system, we go out there with fists clenched and guns blazing, and we scream and point the finger, and we attempt to take the system on and fight and argue and exert our power over the system. We don't simply speak to the people who operate within the parameters of the system with respect and treat them as simple human beings, just the same as us. So we don't have to discuss their authority, because we're not talking to their authority. We're not talking to their suits. We're not talking to their office. What we are talking to is simply a man in a suit, or a woman in a dress, or a woman in a suit. That's the problem, you see. We talk to the office because we believe the office has authority over us, and we go in on the attack because we're not looking at it from a spiritual perspective. Because the people that we're dealing with are just people. And if these people believe they have authority over other people, it's because they're spiritually disconnected. And they're in that state because very often they've been trained to be in that state, unless they're just a full-blown psychopath. And let's face it, 1 to 3% of the population are indeed psychopaths. This is just the way it works. But even with these people, I mean, when you're dealing with any people, if you can simply deal with these people as people, don't talk to their office, talk to the man within the uniform, the man who resides in the office, and always treat them with respect, treat them as you would be treated, you'll find that there is a better way of doing things. And don't get me wrong, folks, I'm not saying that if you simply treat police officers with respect, these guys are going to start acting sane or rational, because very often they're simply not intelligent enough to do any of the above. And many of them are hired because they are rather brutal and sociopathic people who have no empathy and enjoy using tasers and exerting their authority over others. So there's no good attempting to use a spiritual approach when dealing with the police officer. The best thing to do with the police officer is get out of his custody as quickly as possible, simply because most modern-day police officers very much enjoy hurting people and they relish any excuse that you give them to do so. And as terrible as it is to say that, it is unfortunately true. But the thing is that if we could have this spiritual approach in our communities and have the power of community around us, if we could learn to respect our neighbours, then the police would find they have no authority over us, and the government would find they have no authority over us, because they only have authority over us because we live in divided communities. And again, this is a spiritual problem. See, one of the most effective means that this system uses to control people is that it gives us fictional parameters by which to judge ourselves. We're told we have to achieve certain rungs on the economic or social ladder in order to be a successful person, in inverted commas, and very often we are not able to do that. We're taught that it's all about looks, it's all about being cool, it's all about being young and attractive, and very often we are simply not the way the television tells us we should be, and so we judge ourselves poorly and we tend to not respect ourselves. Because we don't respect ourselves, we take out our pent-up frustrations on those closest to us, and we tend not to respect the people around us. And we do this because we judge people by their social status. We judge ourselves by our social status, and we judge them by their social status. And all of these parameters are fictional. We're not really looking at the person and seeing them as simply a person, simply a human being, simply another aspect of creation, as beautiful and as unique as us. And because we don't view people in this manner, we live in divided communities. Divide and conquer, folks. That is the motto, and it is the most effective tool that has been used against mankind. And people think that this is done through co-opting of movements and having different movements and different clubs and different this and different that, and in many ways it is. But it's also right down to an individual level. It's by keeping you divided from your neighbours, keeping you divided from your mother and father, or your sons and daughters, or your brothers and sisters. It's about keeping everybody divided, because everyone is measuring themselves and everybody around them by parameters that are wholly fictional. And ladies and gentlemen, it isn't just that people are measuring themselves and the people around them in their communities by parameters that are fictional. They are also measuring the controlling hand by fictional parameters as well. The rulers, the ruling elite, whatever you want to call them, the powers that believe they be, the Illuminati, for want of a better word. These people have presented themselves as being all-powerful. And most of society, most of the alternative research community has bought into that fact. They believe that those who control the world are all-powerful. But really this just serves to encourage people to negate their own power, because we ultimately have all of the power. The only reason the Illuminati would have the power that they have is because we perceive them to have it. And you think about it, folks, all you have to do is have your finger in the pie, have a controlling interest of movie and media companies, and you can put your Illuminati symbolism and logos in everything. And you can make yourself appear to be far more powerful than you actually are. And I think that's a big mistake the people of the world have made when looking at this system, is they have viewed those powers that sit at the top as being all-powerful, and this has caused people to give away their own personal power. Because those at the top are only as powerful as we let them be, and should we ever choose to step into our own power and to unite as a respectful community, all of who view each other as having equal value to ourselves, then we could change the world in one day. The question is, what will it take for us to do it? To be quite honest with you out there, ladies and gentlemen, I see this current time in history as being a gift to mankind. I really do. I think that this is the first time in history we have ever had the workings of the mechanism laid so bare for all to see. And I believe that this has provided us with the greatest opportunity for human freedom that we've ever had. It's just up to each individual to choose to step into their own personal power and thus step into this freedom. But as I said, very often we attempt to do this on our own, and we've seen the results of people attempting to do that. People just get chewed up and spat out by the machine, and the media paints these people as being criminals or dangerous to society, and the vast majority of the population simply buy into the scam. And so it's become apparent to me over many, many years of research and many years of being proactive in my community and attempting to find ways through this system, that the only really effective mechanism that exists is the power of the people, the power of a united community. And it's also become glaringly apparent to me that this can only be accomplished when people approach those around them from a perspective of respect. And I also find it very, very clear that many people can't respect those around them simply because they do not know how to respect themselves. And this has been the focus of almost all of my radio shows in the last 5 or 6 years that I've done since starting to broadcast to people. We are indeed in dangerous times at the moment, my friends, but the solution is right there in our hands should we choose to accept the mission. We can get through this, and I believe that we will get through this as soon as humankind makes the conscious choice to become empowered again, as soon as people remember who and what they are. But even though I say that I believe we will get through it, I'm not suggesting that people be complacent. I'm not suggesting that people put on rose-colored glasses and march down the path of everything's okay, because everything is most certainly not okay. And we are in danger of allowing the earth to turn into a slavery nightmare, the likes of which most people can possibly not even imagine. But we also have the ability, the opportunity, to take it in the opposite direction if we choose to step into our power. And it's becoming a matter of necessity, my friends, because there are dark forces in control of this planet. There are people who have hearts as black as coal, who do not care one iota about any living thing on this planet. And unfortunately for us, these people have maneuvered themselves into positions of power on this earth. And they have managed to create a system, unbeknownst to most of the people, that is effectively working to enslave and control virtually every single life form on this planet. And not only that which is alive, but also every rock, every mineral, every drop of water, every blade of grass, absolutely everything that exists on this earth, these people seek to control. They've managed to get away with it mainly via a mechanism of distraction that they've put in place. This is another thing the money system is very good at doing to people, is keeping them distracted, because people are forced to collect paper in order to pay to be alive, and the bills go up and up and up, which serves to keep people running faster and faster on the treadmill. And the more totalitarian the system becomes, the more the bills go up, so the faster people are forced to run, so the more distracted they become. And that's the situation that we're facing. But we have the ability to change it through the power of a united community. And this united community that I often speak about, this is simply an idea whose time has come, my friends. There can be no leaders in any of this movement. And indeed, forming neighbourhood cooperatives and vegetable garden growing cooperatives and all these sorts of things are all very well as long as there is no controlling hand in the cooperative. A cooperative must always remain under the control of all the people within the cooperative, because as soon as you start putting leaders in place in any organisation, then it becomes co-opted. It gets led down a path whereby the leadership benefits and nobody else does. And very often these leaderships are put in place and are controlled by the very people that we are seeking to unite against. So that's why it's important for there to never be any leaders in the movement that needs to happen. It needs to be a movement that is not a movement, it is simply an idea in the minds of the people, an idea in the minds of the masses, an idea whose time has come. You see, what we need is a different way of thinking. We need people to change their perspective of what reality is and change their perspective of how they interact with reality. This was a lot of the reason why I brought you the show that I did last week entitled The Energetic Universe, because that understanding of how reality works has been a huge source of strength for me during my quest to address the matter of this system. It's been a huge source of strength to me over all of the emotional trials and tribulations that I've suffered in my life. And it has served to help empower me and always keep me moving forward in a positive direction. And every time I feel disconnected, all I need to do is to take a deep breath and to sit back and consider how reality actually works. And within a very short time, I find that I'm reconnected. It is a huge source of strength to you, my friends, and you need not feel like you are a small, powerless person, because nothing could be further from the truth. There is nobody on this planet who has any more or any less worth than anybody else. Once we realize the reality of this, folks, I believe we'll be able to change things very quickly, as long as we are willing to participate. That's the key, and that has always been the key. The participation of the individual. No one can help you find your truth except yourself. And no one can lead you to your freedom except yourself. You just have to choose to take the first step. And that is it for me now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Thank you to anybody who's ever made a contribution to thecrowhouse.com, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again next week. Please take good care until then. In Lakesh.